No. No second breakfast. No, please. Too much bacon.
Just Smaug.
I want to play riddles in the dark. One is not simply walking. What the fuck?
Doesn't sleep anymore. It's time for the episode.
Gollum? What the fuck are you doing here?
Give us the new episode. It's ours. We want it.
What do you care? You're not even in this movie.
Because it's ours. Ours.
But the Battle of Five Armies is so bad. I have so much to say. I need more time.
It gives us the new episode. Read the stupid fat face.
Hey, come on, be nice.
Well, we be nice to them if they be nice to us.
Oh yeah? Like how?
Or the,
Oh, I mean, hey, listen, you're the one who, can't let me in the bedroom.
Misunderstands this.
Nice to me, and, well, I mean, some circles that has certain connotations. Well, this is awkward.
Yes, this is very awkward indeed.
Roll the thing.
Stupid, horny, fat Hobbit.
This movie begins with the logical ending of the previous movie. Stephen Fry even gives a previously on The Hobbit narration recap.
I warned you! Did I not warn you what would come of dealing with dwarves? Now they've done it! They've woken the dragon! They've brought an apocalypse upon our heads!
But sire, should we not try to save the town?
The town is lost! Save the gold!
Tauriel nopes out with the dwarves and Bard's kids while Smaug circles menacingly overhead. And then... Bard escapes from jail, finds himself a bow, some arrows, and heads up to a bell tower? What happened to the wind lance? Anyway, Bard quickly runs out of arrows, and then his bow gets destroyed. But luckily, his son shows up with that black arrow from the last movie. And of course, Smaug stops his murderous rampage and lands long enough to have a conversation with Bard.
Who are you that would stand against me?
Allowing Bard to rig up this ridiculous contraption and deliver the killing blow. And I think it's important to mention that all of this happens in the course of about 10 minutes. Then there's a scene where people scream a whole bunch.
Hail to the Dragon Slayer! Will nobody think of the children? To the tree with him! Look around you!
And Bard tells them to get their shit together and head for the mountain. Kili tries to convince Tauriel to come with him to Erebor, but Orlando Looms shows up and ruins the whole vibe. So Kili, Philly, Bolford, and Owen head to Erebor. And when they arrive, Bilbo flags them down to warn them about what's going on with Thorin.
You need to leave. We all need to leave.
What do you mean, laddie?
Thorin, he's been down there for days. He doesn't sleep. He barely eats.
Welcome, my sister's sons, to the kingdom of Erebor.
The newly crowned king under the mountain is obsessed with finding the Arkenstone, which Bilbo has, but cannot bring himself to give it to Thorin, knowing that its power would destroy his mind. Meanwhile, Bolg catches up with Azog at the head of an orc army traveling overland from Dol Guldur. Bolg explains that the Mirkwood elves had tracked him to Lake Town, which leads Azog to assume that the elves will be marching on Erebor as well. So he tells Bolg to ride to Gundabad to summon another orc army to back him up. As the people of Lake Town head towards the mountain, they take refuge in the ruined city of Dale to call upon Thorin to fulfill his promise to share in the riches of the mountain. While Legolas and Tauriel decide they're going to ride to Gundabad to confirm Legolas's suspicions about Bolg's involvement in this whole mess. Meanwhile, back in Dol Guldur, we find out why Gandalf was kept alive after all. And just as he's about to get his finger chopped off, Radagast and the White Council show up to throw down! Enter the ghostly shades of the Nazgul, followed by a damn near passable action sequence with a geriatric Christopher Lee and a not so young as he used to be Hugo Weaving. Radagast rescues Gandalf as the two oldest fogies in Middle-earth wipe out the Naz ghosts. And then Sauron shows up, only to be put in his place by Galadriel.
Go back to the void from whence you came!
Who goes all Dark Queen on him with the light of Eärendil, which I don't know whose idea it was, but you make bad decisions and these movies suffer because of them. After he is swept to safety, Gandalf rolls out to Erebor in hopes of warning his friends about the army of orcs headed their way. And Radagast gives Gandalf his staff. Back at Erebor, Thorin throws a Joffrey Baratheon level fit over not being able to find the Arkenstone.
Am I not the king?
Even going so far as to question the loyalty of the company, who gave up everything to help him in his quest, punctuated by this wholesome as fuck exchange between Bilbo and Thorin himself, where a genuine shred of Thorin's humanity can still be glimpsed.
I'm gonna plant it in my garden, in Bag End.
It's a poor prize to take back to the Shire.
One day it'll grow, and every time I look at it, I'll remember everything that happened, the good, the bad, and how lucky I am that I made it home.
But it's washed away with the news of the arrival of the people of Lake Town. And so that night, the dwarves take pains to fortify the entrance of Erebor. The next morning, Thranduil and his army of elves arrive with much needed provisions. But the King of Mirkwood asserts that he is not there to help any of the people there.
I did not come on your behalf. I came to reclaim something of mine.
Even though he kinda just said,
I heard you needed aid.
There's a lot of contradiction. All Thranduil wants are the white gems of Lassavar, which he's been harping on for this entire trilogy. Bard asks for the opportunity to speak with Thorin to appeal to his reason and honor, which the Elven King allows. But Thorin is so changed by the dragon sickness that he has abandoned reason for madness.
Tell me, why should I honor such terms?
Because you gave us your word. Does that mean nothing?
Begone! Ere our arrows fly!
Having failed with negotiations, cue the gear up montage. Thorin gives Bilbo the mithril shirt that saves Frodo's ass during that scrap that the Fellowship has in the mines of Moria before the Balrog shows up.
Mithril.
Thorin then pulls Bilbo aside and has a conversation about his favorite topic,
The Arkenstone.
peppering in some familiar Middle-earth addiction language.
One of them is false. This gold is ours, and ours alone. I will not part with a single coin.
Meanwhile, Legolas and Tauriel arrive at Gundabad, and the Elf Prince talks about his mother.
My mother died there. My father does not speak of it. There is no grave. No memory. Nothing.
Whatever, it's dumb and I hate it. Back in Dale, Gandalf arrives and attempts to inform Bard and Thranduil about the army of orcs on their way to fuck everything up. He also explains that they're not coming for the gold. Sauron wants his army to occupy Erebor for its strategic position. to use the stronghold to reclaim Angmar, the land once controlled by the Witch King. Thranduil dismisses Gandalf's warning because he just marched to Erebor from Mirkwood and he didn't see no orc armies, which is pretty logical. But then in the next scene, we see that the orcs have moved the army underground. It's just a little confusing because in the previous scene, we see them marching overground, presumably during the same time when Thranduil's army would have been marching from Mirkwood. Sure, whatever. Back in Gundabad, Bolg leads another army of orcs to Erebor. Legolas and Tauriel nope the fuck out and head back to the mountain. That night, Bilbo tries to slip away, but Bolfer catches him, just like in that one scene, in an unexpected journey. Except this time, it's a lot heavier. What with the whole imminent threat of all-out war at dawn. Bolfer bids the Hobbit a very fond farewell, and Bilbo rushes off to speak with the armies gathered before the gates of Erebor. Back in said camp, Gandalf is still doing a piss-poor job of convincing Bard and Thranduil that the orcs are indeed on their way. But then, Bilbo shows up with the Arkenstone, and the focus of the narrative shifts back to Thorin being the biggest dickhead in Middle-earth, giving those gathered there one last hope that this can all be resolved peacefully. Bilbo returns to Erebor against Gandalf's advice, and Gandalf talks about the evil of gold, and the dragon sickness comes up again. Which I'm gonna talk about in detail, because
I hate it so much.
The next morning, the army of elves and humans, I mean, if you can call this pathetic little contingency of humans an army, arrive at the gates of Erebor, and are met with a hostile Thorin and his 12 surly friends. Bard informs Thorin that they have the Arkenstone, but when he refuses to believe them, Bilbo chimes in and tells Thorin why he did what he had to do.
I was going to give it to you. But what thief?
The dwarf I met in Bag End would never have gone back on his word, would never have doubted the loyalty of his kin.
Throw him from the rampart!
So Thorin flips out, and before he can kill Bilbo, Gandalf shames the newly crowned king under the mountain into allowing the Hobbit to leave. And when all hope seems lost, a raven arrives, heralding the coming of an army of Ironfoot dwarves, led by Thorin's cousin Dain, played by a completely CGI Billy Connolly. And so, at approximately halfway through the movie, the Battle of Five Armies is underway. At first, it's just the elves and the dwarves who are thrown down. But then, oh yeah, that army of orcs Gandalf mentioned, and everyone just seemed to sort of forget about, well, they're here, and it turns out they used wereworms to burrow through the earth. How did Azog set up that war scarecrow over there without anybody noticing it? So the elves and the dwarves put aside their bullshit and they throw down against the forces of Dol Guldur. And Thorin forbids the company from taking part in the fray, insisting they fall back. Moments after the first charge, Azog sends a division of orcs to lay siege to the ruined city of Dale, forcing the armies to fight on two fronts. So Bard and Gandalf fall back to make a desperate stand against the far better equipped army of orcs. Back on the battlefield, the Mirkwood elves and the Ironfoot dwarves are losing ground. Dain calls out to his king, afraid that he's been forsaken, while Thranduil struggles to hold his ground. Inside the throne room of Erebor, Thorin has this heart-to-heart with Dwalin, who I guess is supposed to be the stoic warrior type who finally snaps him out of this, but I don't know why it's Dwalin who is supposed to be the one to break through, but whatever. And then Thorin has this scene where he breaks free of the dragon sickness, or whatever. And he's back to being the Thorin we all, well, never really liked to begin with because he's always been kind of an asshole.
I cannot guarantee his safety.
Nor will I be responsible for his fate.
He's been lost ever since he left home.
I cannot risk the fate of this quest for the sake of one dwarf. Not even my own kin.
Gandalf said to meet him here. On no account will we...
Do you see him? We have no time to wait upon the wizard. We're on our own. Come.
Anyway, Thorin returns to the company and gives them a rousing speech before leading the charge that changes the tide of battle, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense when you consider that there are just 13 dwarves. Thorin and Kili and Fili and Dwalin make their way up to Ravenhill, where Azog has set up his command scarecrow thingy. And along the way, there's this scene from Fast and the Furious, Tolkien O'Drift. I'm really proud of that joke. I don't think it's a reach at all. But all jokes aside, I actually kind of like this scene. Probably because it's a battle sequence with characters I actually know and give a fuck about. Keely, Fili, and Dwalin cut loose the remaining rams from the chariot, bailing on Balin, who has a pretty well-placed Martak moment.
I'm too old for this shit.
Back in Dale, Legolas and Tauriel arrive to warn Gandalf of Bolg's imminent arrival with another army of orcs. So Thorin, his nephews, and Dwalin arrive at Ravenhill to find it abandoned until the aforementioned Gundabad orc army arrives. Thranduil chooses this moment to decide that too many elves have died and calls his army to retreat back to Mirkwood, effectively leaving Thorin overrun without any backup. So Bilbo puts on the ring to stealthily rush up to Ravenhill to warn him. Then Tauriel confronts Thranduil about fleeing with his tail between his legs, and Thranduil almost kills her. But Legolas steps in and saves her, before making the way to Ravenhill himself. Bilbo arrives to warn Thorin only to realize it's too late. Fili has been captured and is executed, which we might actually care about if you gave us any sort of character development for Fili other than he's loyal to his brother. That's kinda all we get. Then it's back to the flashy, stabby, pointless, unending action sequence that is the second half of this fucking movie. Tauriel and Keely fight Bolg, and then this happens. And Tauriel tries to kill herself and Bolg, but she's saved at the last second by Legolas, who has his much anticipated second showdown with Bolg on a crumbling stone structure. Because I guess the stakes needed to be ramped up to completely ludicrous levels in order to make this fight feel even remotely dramatic. In a strange moment of pity or honor or whatever, Legolas throws Thorin the sword he took from him in the previous movie. And after pulling off some Prince of Persia shit, Legolas dispatches Bolg. Oh my god! Oh my god! It's a Huracan Rana! Oh, the captain of the Gundabad orc army is never coming back from this one! You said it, Mike, he's down for the count! Where's the referee? We need a 3 count here! And back to Thorin fighting with Azog, which goes on for far too long. Then the eagles show up, and so does Bjorn and Radagast. And for a brief moment, I am happy. Thorin goes all Batman Begins on Azog, but it turns out the Pale Orc rolled a nat 20 on his death save. And after many a hem and haw, Thorin allows the Defiler to mortally wound him in order to score a killing blow. Bilbo wakes up and witnesses Thorin's last moment as the battle comes to an end all around them. And thus begins the cavalcade of sad goodbyes and logical endings that made everyone hate the return of the king. There's the sad Tauriel scene, parts 1 and 2, the Legolas goodbye scene, which I hate, the sad Survivor's Guilt scene with Bilbo, Gandalf, and the remaining dwarves of the original 13, the agonizingly long funeral scene, punctuated by the heartfelt goodbye Hobbit scene, and the final parting between Bilbo and Gandalf outside of the Shire. Then the movie decides to give you a little giggle as Bilbo arrives back in Hobbiton to find that he's been declared dead and all of his possessions are being sold off at auction. But then the movie delivers the most devastating blow of all. Bilbo enters Bag End to find it completely stripped, robbed of its charm and cheer. His hobbit hole, his sanctuary, it's been desecrated, forever changed. And in the ruins of his old life, he reaches into the embers of his future for the root of that change, the Ring of Power. And as if to hammer that point home, we rejoin Ian home just as Gandalf arrives to celebrate the Hobbit's 111th birthday. Anyway, that's the fucking end. It's over, okay? Things I liked. The final scene in Dol Guldur is something I've wanted to see on screen since NewLine Cinema announced that they were going to make the Lord of the Rings trilogy. But it's so fucking jam-packed with Tolkien lore, it's practically bursting at the seams with half-assed expositional dialogue. A bit of context. This encounter is really only mentioned in the books when Gandalf explains why he has to leave the company and the Hobbit to go deal with some shit, and he alludes to a battle against a necromancer of great power who may be a herald of the Dark Lord, if not Sauron himself. The book is called The Hobbit, so the reader knows as much about what's happening as Bilbo does. which lends a sense of grandeur to Tolkien's world. Now, I like this scene because I really wanted to know what went down, and I will admit to no small degree of elation while watching it for the first time. However, Galadriel is one of the only elves who was given one of the 3 rings made by Sauron who still wears it, the White Ring, Nenya. The others, Narya and Vilya, passed from their original bearers to Gandalf and Elrond respectively. And well, here they are. So why didn't they use them? Sauron obviously knows that Gandalf has Narya and Galadriel still has Nenya. Wouldn't it be more dramatic if the White Council were holding their own with the power of their 2 rings to dispatch the Nazgûs, only to have Sauron arrive and act all, "You are nothing without the power of the 3rd ring." And then Elrond can be all, "Oh, what? You mean this ring? Boom! Vilya, biatch!" I like that Bilbo gives the Arkenstone to Bard and Thranduil. Not just because it's something that happens in the books, but because it's kind of the only thing Bilbo does in this movie, which is something that kind of irks me. This trilogy is called The Hobbit, and yet the first movie is really the only one that focuses on Bilbo. In the Desolation of Smaug and the Battle of 5 Armies, Bilbo becomes more of a supporting character to Thorin, who deals with the lion's share of conflict after an unexpected journey. And I couldn't help but notice the monster that is clearly the only on-screen manifestation of Guillermo del Toro's influence in this movie. This thing is genuinely terrifying, and it gets a lot of screen time in this movie. More screen time than Stephen Fry, and he gets his own standalone title credit at the end of the movie. Which brings me around to my next point. The Battle of 5 Armies definitely has a better handle on the tone it wants to take, and that tone is dark and violent, with very little to giggle at and definitely no songs.
Down, down, down in Goblin Town.
Kill it with fire! Lastly, I will admit that the battle scenes weren't all total garbage. There were a couple of moments I genuinely enjoyed, like this scene.
You've lost your axe? No, he's not. There you go, cousin.
You know where you can stick that.
Something I didn't like. First of all, the dragon slaying scene is a fucking mess. Apart from being the logical climax of the previous movie, what the fuck happened to the Windlands? You took all that time setting it up in the last movie, why wouldn't you at least show Smaug destroying it if Bard isn't going to use it? Its absence from this movie confuses and infuriates us! Second, if Bard knows that there's a missing scale on Smaug's underside, why doesn't he try to hit it with any of the arrows he shoots at him? Why does it only become apparent to him once he has the black arrow and is using this ridiculously implausible setup? Third, why does Smaug take the time to land and talk to Bard before charging him, when all he needs to do is continue flying overhead and raining death and fire down upon Lake Town? The stakes are already so fucking high. Why do you need to ramp up the drama pointlessly to add significance to this moment? It's bad writing, and I hate it. Would it have been too much to ask for you to just include it in the last movie? Maybe you could have cut down on Smaug chasing the dwarves around Erebor. Or maybe you just could have spent less screen time establishing the Windlands. However you do it, give me the logical ending to the story you were trying to tell in the last movie, instead of trying to bait me into seeing the next movie to finally watch aforementioned ending. Who the fuck do you think you are, Stephen King or something? That's a deep cut for my Dark Tower peeps out there. And it's dumb. It's only a 10-minute scene. Just put it where it belongs, okay? Get it out of this movie and put it in the last movie. The tension of the love triangle continues for no reason. Tauriel has already abandoned her life in Mirkwood to pursue the dwarves and turned her back on Legolas to save Kili. And yet, she still goes with Legolas to Gundabad instead of staying with Kili. Why? It was poorly structured conflict in the last movie. In this movie, it makes no fucking sense. There's a lot of talk in these movies about how the treasure of Erebor is cursed, and the power of the Arkenstone, which corrupted Thror, Thorin's grandfather, but the origin of that evil power is never actually explained. Some characters assert that it's Smaug's presence that corrupted the vast treasure by calling it dragon sickness. But the treasure drove Thor mad long before the dragon ever showed up. So the wealth of Erebor seems to have a draw akin to that of the Ring of Power, which doesn't make sense at all. For those of you who might not know this, the Rings of Power were made by Sauron with the malicious intent of enslaving their bearers to the power of the One Ring. But Sauron had no role in what happened at Erebor. And while he may want to ally his forces with the dragon, the treasure of the dwarves remains untouched by his influence. So maybe they decided to shoehorn in some kind of reason for Thorin's behavior. It just feels really unnatural. And speaking of motivations, Thranduil's motivation is so unclear it fucking hurts. How does Thranduil even know that Smaug is dead? In the Desolation of Smaug, he makes it clear that he wants nothing to do with the troubles of others. So, what prompted the complete change of heart? And furthermore, how does he show up with an army in like 2 days? Isn't Dol Guldur in Mirkwood? Wouldn't he have run across that army of orcs at some point during the march from his own kingdom? Am I the only one around here who gives a shit about the goddamn rules? Also, wereworms. Let's put on our thinking caps and break this one down for a second, shall we? Werewolf means man-wolf in Old English. I don't know if you knew that. Now you know that. So wereworms must mean man-worm. Which, if there were any kind of justice in this fucking world, would mean that there were giant dicks coming up out of those holes. I mean, look, it's not even a part of Tolkien's lore, so maybe it's not worth getting this upset about it, but I'm still gonna. This trilogy is called The Hobbit, and yet An Unexpected Journey is really the only movie where Bilbo is clearly represented as the protagonist. In the Desolation of Smaug, Bilbo kinda takes a backseat to Thorin's expanding character arc, which comes to its climax in the Battle of Five Armies, leaving Bilbo with little character to develop. He's more of a supporting character, and at times a convenient plot device, instead of the vehicle that drives the story. Thorin's arc is dumb. Why does this scene need to happen in the room where he failed to kill Smaug? Why not in the treasure hall? It doesn't even make sense. When he falls in and is completely consumed by the gold puddle, that's when he breaks free? Doesn't the imagery kind of suggest exactly the opposite? Your imagery is confusing, that's all I'm saying here. Lastly, Bilbo fighting is some bullshit. In the book, he refuses to participate in the battle, puts on the ring to avoid detection, but still gets knocked out and misses all the action on account of being unconscious. But it doesn't put butts in seats. You gotta see the fights. You gotta see the action. You gotta see that hobbit stick that orc in. Whatever, it's cool. I hate it. Now, we're gonna talk about what I would have changed. It's been a while since I said it, so I'm just gonna remind you, I'm just some asshole on the internet talking about movies that aren't relevant. So make of that what you will. These movies depart from the text so dramatically that I felt like the only way to polish this turd would be to use some story elements that already exist therein to try and make it seem like less of a meandering mess. Firstly, let's carry over some details from my previous reviews. Bolg is now the defunct leader of the orc army amassing in Dol Guldur, because the audience believes that Azog was killed by Bilbo during the final showdown in An Unexpected Journey. With me so far? Bolg spent nearly all of the Desolation of Smaug hunting Thorin and company in an attempt to avenge his daddy, and instead of retreating at the end of the Desolation of Smaug, Bolg pursues Thorin up the Lonely Mountain when he realizes that the 4 dwarves that lingered in Lake Town were not the ones he was after. So the spawn of Azog watches Lake Town burn as he and his company of warg riders stealthily climb the mountain to continue hunting Thorin. Back in Lake Town, Kili, Fili, Bofur, Owen, and Tauriel help Bard's family escape from Lake Town. And when they spot Bard shooting at Smaug from the bell tower, Bard's son can tell the 5 very capable warriors about the black arrow he hid in the last movie. And they can bring it to him. and together formulate a strategy for killing Smaug. Maybe even one that involves the fucking Windlance! Anyway, Bard has now killed the dragon with the help of the 4 dwarves from Thorin's company and the assistance of the Elven Queen of Mirkwood. I'm gonna make that part official too. So going forward, think of Tauriel as Legolas's mom and Thranduil's wife. Still with me? Okay. In the aftermath of Smaug's attack, Kili and Fili can be the ones who recommend that the survivors of Lake Town go to Erebor and seek shelter there, and maybe take their share of the gold their uncle promised them. Bard can voice his doubts about the likeliness of Thorin's survival, even throw some shade at Thorin for how much of a dick he was to Bard in the last movie. But the faithful sister sons of the King Under the Mountain can insist that their uncle is an honorable dwarf and will likely reward Bard for slaying Smaug in addition to delivering what was promised. So as they're gathering up their shit, Legolas arrives ahead of his father's army in an attempt to reason with his mother before Thranduil shows up and tries to kill Kili. But Tauriel has made her choice and Legolas is a good guy. Remember that? He decides to honor his mother's decision even if he doesn't understand it. Saddened and confused, he leaves, returning to his father's side. The next day, the survivors of Lake Town arrive at Erebor with the 4 dwarves and Tauriel in tow. Bilbo and the rest of the company greet them joyously and congratulate Bard on being an all-around badass. You could even have a moment where Dwalin, who outright hated Bard in the last movie, is like, "You're a warrior. You have my respect." Whatever, I mean, I'm just trying to connect some dots here. But then Thorin arrives, all dolled up as the King Under the Mountain, looking more like his grandfather than ever before. And upon seeing the Elven Queen, he flies into a rage, attacking Tauriel, only to be confronted by Kili. And so they fight as the rest of the company looks on in fear and confusion, not knowing what to do or whose side to take. But it's Fili who steps in to stop them, showing just how loyal to his brother he really is. In his wrath, Thorin then banishes his sister sons from the kingdom, labeling them traitors to their race, and then turns his ire on Bard, accusing him of coming here to steal the wealth that is his birthright. Bard, Tauriel, and the last 2 sons of Durin leave empty-handed, hearts dark with anger. That night, Kili and Fili have an argument. Fili would blame his brother for not thinking clearly, accusing him of always being too reckless. And then Kili can say some really mean shit to end the fight. I don't know what that might be, but use your imagination. I'm doing a lot of the heavy lifting here, okay? And so, crushed by his brother's harsh words, Fili wanders off to be alone. Then Thranduil arrives with his army to find Tauriel comforting Kili, flies into a rage, and tries to kill the dwarf. But Tauriel defends him, and now the 2 former lovers fight. Thranduil proves to be the more powerful opponent, injuring Tauriel severely, forcing Kili and Legolas to both enter the fray. After a few moments of high emotions and singing steel, Gandalf arrives on the scene, spouting some speech about how they cannot fight amongst themselves, warning about the vast orc army on the march from Dol Guldur. That night, Bilbo still slips away from the company, but while he's traveling to the enemy camp, he spies Fili by himself, distraught and contemplative. The young dwarf doesn't notice that Bolg and his warg riders have surrounded him. Recognizing him as Thorin's nephew, Bolg decides he's going to take Fili prisoner, maybe sprinkle in some dialogue about this being a peace offering to his master for not killing Thorin yet. Bilbo rushes to the camp, tells everyone about what's happened to Fili, and gives Bard the Arkenstone before scurrying back to Erebor. Upon hearing this news, Kili decides he's going after Bolg to save his brother. And Tauriel insists on going with him, despite being gravely wounded hours before. Legolas refuses to allow his mother to come to any more harm as a result of her relationship with this dwarf. So he decides he's going to go with Kili instead. Neither are pleased by the prospect, but they agree because of their love for Tauriel. The exchange at the gates of Erebor, the arrival of Dain and his army of dwarves from the Iron Hills, the arrival of the orc armies, and the setting aside of differences to clash with them, all of that can stay pretty much the same, just absent Kili, Fili, and Azog. And speaking of Kili, he and Legolas are tracking Bolg through the mountains, Legolas, who is older and probably the better tracker, suspects that the orcs are taking Fili to Gundabad. And upon their arrival at the orc stronghold, they see the engines of war in full production, darkening the sky with plumes of black smoke. Inside, Fili is delivered to Bolg's master, who is revealed to be none other than
Azog the Defiler.
pleased with his son or spawn or whatever. Again, not really sure how spawn of links you on the family tree. Azog sounds the march, and the second Orc army pours forth from Gundabad, bound for the Lonely Mountain. Kili and Legolas see this and take note that Azog has returned. Kili will insist that they try and save his brother, but Legolas will be the voice of reason, promising that they will save him. If Azog wanted him dead, he would be dead already. The important thing now is to warn everyone about the second Orc army. So they rush back to Erebor. At this point, things can roll on pretty much the same way they had, with the Orcs slowly overtaking the elves, men, and dwarves. Thorin, however, must remain in the mountain. Still acting a damn fool, but not under some kind of dragon sickness bullshit. Greed and prejudice are relatable enough to make this a satisfying arc. We don't need some made-up curse like dragon sickness to thicken the plot. So maybe when the hour seems its darkest, that's when Radagast, Bjorn, and the Eagles show up to kinda even things out until Thorin can pull his shit together. Then Legolas and Kili return to the battlefield. Legolas goes to warn Bard and Thranduil, while Kili goes to find Thorin, but instead finds Dain, who laments that Thorin has yet to join the fray. Kili tells Dain that Azog is back and that he has taken Fili prisoner. Dain and Kili will then go to find Thorin, who has retreated to the treasure hold. Dain can tell the remaining dwarves of the company to join the fight, as they are much needed. And then Thorin commands them to stay. Kili tries to reason with his uncle, but upon seeing his traitorous nephew, he loses his shit, calling all of them traitors, commanding them to leave him, to die for all he cares. And so, with hearts heavy, they do, leaving the king under the mountain alone atop the vast treasure hoard. Back in Dale, Legolas tells Thranduil about the Gundabad orcs, and now his father can decide it's time to leave. As the battle ain't going so well. Then Tauriel steps in, still a little fucked up, but remember, she's a super badass healer, right? So she's already looking a lot better than she was a day ago. And she's all, fuck you, Thranduil, you cowardly ass bitch. I'm taking your army, and I'm gonna lead the charge myself. This rallies the elves, and Legolas joins his mother for what may be the elves' last charge. While this is happening, Thorin sits alone, combing through the vast mountain of gold, looking for the Arkenstone, completely refusing to believe that it was taken from him. And in his madness, he begins to hallucinate. The statues in the hall come to life, kings of the Lion of Durin, casting their judgment upon him.
The horns of war blast in the distance, and the king under the mountain cowers in his treasure hall. You are a disgrace to your ancestors.
And he rails against them. He needs the Arkenstone to unite his people, so that they might stand against the shadow growing in the east. Then his grandfather, his father, hell, it can even be Durin himself, who tells Thorin that a king doesn't need a trinket to instill the loyalty of his people. And he used to know that. Horn blast, signaling the Gundabad orcs' arrival at Ravenhill. Thorin emerges from the gates to look out upon the battlefield, just in time to see Azog holding aloft Fili, who is executed. Thorin charges into battle. Kili explodes into rage, challenging Azog directly. Tauriel joins him, but is waylaid by Bolg, who fights with both the Elven Queen and her son Legolas. The company can also step in to Kili's fight with Azog, giving everyone a chance to get a good shot on the Pale Orc before Thorin shows up to deliver the killing blow. Then Kili joins the fight with Legolas and Tauriel against Bolg, just in time to watch the Elven Queen fall to a blow from the Orc captain's weapon. Kili and Legolas dispatch Bolg shortly thereafter. while Thorin finishes his fight with Azog. But instead of Bilbo being the only one who hears Thorin's last words, the entire company is now gathered around him. And you can fucking skip that tired-ass funeral scene that drags on forever. The movie can wrap up more or less the same way, but I believe with these extensive changes, you get a ultimately more compelling arc for your characters, with drama and conflict that doesn't feel forced. But hey, all this bullshit, this is my opinion. Thanks for watching the last review in the Hobbit trilogy. Hope you enjoyed. I certainly had a lot of fun making it. As always, the Clearing the Queue theme song and a lot of the original music used in this episode was written and recorded by my good friend Chuck Miller, and you can find a link to his SoundCloud in the information below. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. It means a lot to me. Thanks again for sticking around, because I'm gonna review more stuff, and if you think you can stop me, well, I hope you got an army. Oh. Well, then bring it on!